Well, I'll go ahead and call to order the February 6th, 2020 meeting of the Clive City Council. The clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Cirksena.
Here.
Councilmember Klein.
Here.
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember McCoy. Councilmember Judkins. Councilmember Weaver.
Here.
We know that Susan is out and that we believe Michael is on his way. Nice to have everybody here. Clearly, I missed the memo. I forgot to wear my Public Works yellow vest tonight. Hope you all will forgive me. Nice to see everybody, and Happy New Year. If you would stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. We have a special guest here with us this evening that I think some of you might recognize. Gentleman to my left, Mr. Dennis Henderson. Dennis, if you'd approach the podium, please. And I know that you came to see us because you just can't get enough.
Just old time's sake, yeah.
Benefits discussions and those
I just figured you'd all quake when you're shaking your shoes when you saw me show up, maybe, or something.
He wants back.
Say, oh no, he's back.
No, nice to have you here, Dan.
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of an honor to get to be here tonight too for this particular occasion. It's a situation where we get to make an announcement, and it's a very pleasant one to get to be able to make. The mayor and I and several others from the Lions Club serve on the Citizen of the Year Selection Committee. And this year we had some very, very fine candidates, but I think the one that was the outstanding one of all was John Edwards. And John was selected to be the Citizen of the Year. He's very, very deserving. All of us in the city that live here can and live and or work here or both can show our gratitude to John because, you've got an individual that served since 1995 on the city council, and I think missed maybe one special meeting, but during all that time that the man's been here, I mean, he's just, you can always count on John being here, and he brings his wisdom with him every time.
Guess he doesn't have anything else to do.
Oh, is that it? I think he probably comes to keep tabs on you, Ted, but it's a pleasure to get to announce that John was selected to be the Citizen of the Year. He'll be honored at the Chamber Annual Dinner, along with the Business of the Year and so forth. There's a few things that the Chamber will be announcing here shortly if they haven't already. And it'll be a night to celebrate John's service to the community. And for his service, we're certainly all thankful. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, John. Despite all of the wisecracks about being older than dirt and being here since the city was incorporated, you are certainly appreciated and respected, and so we're going to look forward to the chamber event and the Lions event on the 25th, the evening of the 25th, and would invite everyone to attend that great event as we celebrate great things in our community. John certainly being one of them. So thank you again, John, and congratulations.
Well, thanks. I do worry about it being a roast, however.
We'll try to steer clear of that if we can. So good. And Danny, thank you. Thank you for the nomination, and thank you for being here tonight. Okay. Next, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Agenda is approved. So what we have this evening are a series of discussion items, 4 of them. The first one is regarding fiscal year 2020-2021 proposed budget and follow-up items. Matt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Following the 2 January work sessions where we reviewed the first work session being related to the Public Works budget, road use tax fund, and the utility funds, there was some questions, just follow-up questions that the council, some additional information that the council wanted related to a couple, one main proposal in the Public Works budget that was related to the addition, requesting an addition of an operations specialist to be focused on right-of-way management for the city. And then in addition, there was a desire to have some follow-up information on the operating hours for our dump trucks. Information on both those questions was included in the memo that was included in the packet for the work session tonight. So happy to have additional discussions on that. And I know Jeff is also here to address any of those questions in terms of, I think one of the main questions related to the right-of-way staffing is getting an understanding of what some other metro communities are doing to tackle the same issue of managing the large increase of requests for permits in the right of way, whether it's telecom, fiber, or potentially 5G installation related, that those are ramping up. And the proposal is to add a position to specifically be focused on that, but also in the wintertime, having that position also be a part of our snow crews and be focused in the traffic division, but a dedicated position. Something new that we're trying, or at least proposing to try in Public Works, where we have a position that's specifically an operations specialist that's very specified to one area, and that might be something we further explore down the road if the council has interest in adding this position. And then there's also a revenue source tied to that. With the additional permits that we're seeing, we're also looking at adjusting our permitting fees to be consistent across the board, and that would provide some additional revenue to help financially support the position. In addition, the operating hours of the trucks, there were some questions just wanting to understand better the 10-year replacement cycle that we have on all the dump trucks. Included in the packets and the memo was a kind of a listing of where we're at with a lot of the mileage versus operating hours of those trucks. And in terms of those cycles, so that additional follow-up information was provided. So before I move on to the second half of the questions, just wanted to see if there was any additional clarifying points that the staff could provide regarding the Public Works request, and be happy to entertain those.
Council, Eric?
Matt, on the right-of-way request right there, you projected $30,000 per year in new fees right there. How do you base that, and how many years can that projection be counted on?
Jeff, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I know we're just starting the 5G craze. We're adding lots of facilities. We've already got, I think, 10 or 11 more requests, unfortunately, for new ones. They're on the West Des Moines side for us, but they are coming in. The assumption is, we continue to expand. New technologies are going to come about, whether it's fiber now or an improved fiber later. They're going to be managing. Or new wireless facilities. After 5G comes 6G, comes 7G, whatever those are. There's always going to be something being changed out there to improve technologies. I don't see it going away ever. Will it slow down at some point? It may. That was kind of the idea behind us using an operations specialist for the right-of-way. We can also utilize them as we expanded. We also identified at build-out we would need at least 2 more operations specialist. This one will help push those full-time positions back, and if it would go away, it would turn into one of those potentially down the road. I don't anticipate that at all. I see it continuing growing and continuing to be an important part of what we do. It's just not fiber and small wireless facilities. It's also all the Mid-America permits. They do a lot of work in the right-of-way. We try to follow up and make sure that they follow up with theirs. They're usually pretty good at it, but sometimes they get missed, and we like to keep on top of it and make sure our citizens, we can respond to them when they ask why it hasn't been cleaned up, so we know who's there. This person would be also managing that out in the field itself, helping us keep up with it and making sure the restoration's complete and we don't leave people's yards messed up for long periods of time.
I understand the need for position. My question is, how do you base that? What data do you base the projections on?
Well, going back, I think in the original memo, we talked about how over the last few years they've grown. We did 60 permits last year. It was up from 50s the year before and 40 the year before. It continues to grow. It's going upwards. It's not showing any signs of leveling. With 5G just getting started, expect for several years this to continue. Once they put all those sites in and just hang facilities out there, they have to then go back and connect them all with fiber. So it's more fiber permits to connect them all back up. Again, just with 5G, it's going to be several years before they get to build out. That's going to continue at the rate it's continuing. And then as new technologies come in and start moving out throughout the city, we'll be working on that. That's how we base the projections, was on what we had for this year. We didn't put any inflators on it. The 30,000 is just based on if we repeat what's last year, and it's already coming in pretty strong this year.
Thank you.
So Jeff, do you see a substantial increase this year in additional permitting? And one of the reasons why I'm asking is, as you know, we've got a number of personnel additions that we're looking at in the budget. And so I guess I'm just curious, is it possible to delay this a year, or are you seeing it really ramping up this year?
Well, I got one guy behind me I know that's already getting overwhelmed with the amount of work he's doing and taking away from his normal duties. we've been mentioning this for a couple years. We've been pushing it back, trying to wait. We're at the point where, during the summer months, it's going to be a full-time position. There may be a day or two here where we can pull them and use them on a patching crew or using on something else. But with what we have going on in the right-of-way right now, I don't anticipate during construction season there to be too much other time. It's going to add a service we don't currently have, and that's following up in the field. We don't have time to follow the contractors around the field and which contractor was here last, which one was the one that left the mess, which one caused this. We end up chasing those around. So it's adding some service, but it's also taking a lot of our time right now. A lot of time for me is for design locate requests where you respond to the consulting firms and give them information on where your utilities are. I think I'm already up to 15 or 20 of those here in the first month of this year already, and we're not even into construction season yet, so that will continue. Mid-Am is going to be doing a lot of work. We get, those permits that we need to look at. Anything that the DOT does, they send out right-of-way permits for us to review. So there's a lot of work out there. We're at the point where I know what it's stressing us, and I think the time is here for us to add this position.
If I could
So-
add to that too, Councilmember Weaver, Christina would mention this if she was here at the moment, but one of the things with the new legislation that the state passed related to particularly small wireless facilities is the city, making sure the cities are consistent with how we regulate any kind of work in the right of way. So for example, we're not treating small wireless facility operations differently than others. And so just that consistency in terms of oversight and the additional work that if we want to make sure we're on top of things, pushed us more towards moving this position forward now with those new state regulations that were approved last year. And then we kind of talked about how we got the aesthetics policy approved before it went into effect to make sure we could get some local control of what kind of things are being installed in the right of way. And then part of our thought process is this position is helping us ensure compliance with a lot of the new regulations that both were required to enforce.
Sure. And I think all that's fair. I know in the memo, it talked about in the non-construction season, some of the offset tasks that this position could do, snow removal and things of that nature. I mean, we're confident that there's enough additional work in the non-construction season that this is a fully justified position.
Position will help with anything else the other operations specialists do in the non-working season with maintenance inside or anything like that if there's not work. Permits do come in year-round. We're already getting them, so there's going to be work for them during the winter. We will pull them off and for snow removal, make sure we can try to keep the 9 trucks on the street. So, yeah, I don't think we have any doubt about it at all.
So if I could add to that too, I think, one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of the in-house staffing of some of our stabilization, stream bank stabilization and other improvements that we're doing in the fall and early winter months, the load on the Public Works Department is going to increase over time with the demands that we have on those stormwater projects, particularly as we start looking at Indian Hills Woods and other major stream bank stabilization projects associated with the Greenbelt Triad projects in the future. So I think that the work will definitely be there even in the non-construction, non-typical construction season, because then we can start moving to more of those stream bank projects where the ground is a little more solid, and we're not doing those in the spring and the summer months as much because of the wet conditions. So I definitely think for the long term that load will be there.
And to get back to one of the other questions was really the sustainability of the funding based on the number of permits that are coming in and the increase in the permits that we see coming. It's just one of the few positions that we can have funded from an outside source.
Yes.
So I think that's pretty critical. Matt, you mentioned something earlier about, just about what other communities are doing to address this issue. And I'm interested in their hiring strategies as it relates to this issue.
Yes. So and we kind of provided a list here in the memo of the different, what some of the different cities' approaches are. Some are using engineering tech positions within their engineering division to oversee those, coupled either it's a dedicated position or it's coupled with other work in the engineering division. Cities like Urbandale has added a position here specifically for this, similar to what we're proposing here just a few years ago, and they're already seeing almost full maximization of that position because of they're getting the same kind of requests we are, particularly these main traffic corridors where a lot of these telecoms want to be putting in equipment. So around us, we're seeing our neighboring cities dealing with a similar issue, and looking, some are either adding staff or starting to overtax existing staff and starting to have the same conversation that we're having today about whether or not they need to have a dedicated position. But we do have some that have added that and some that are looking at it.
Real quick, Matt, I noticed that Windsor Heights does not have a position. How are they dealing with this?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know if you talked to them specifically about it, other than they shared that they just didn't have somebody dedicated to it.
Using another tech or something, or?
Again, when he responded, Doug does not have a similar position. I didn't follow up with him at that time. I did follow up with a couple of the others and talk to him how they're using him. You know, like Urbandale mentioned, they have a full-time person, but it's not enough. They could even use more. It's a demanding position. Waukee uses 2 or 3 people, but you know, one of the ideas and hopes of putting this with one person is one person can oversee it all and be up to date on what's going on everywhere, not just 2 or 3 people sharing information and trying to keep it. I get the design locate requests right now, so I know some things that are coming. I have to pass that on to make sure that they know what's going on too, where if one person's in charge, they kind of oversee the whole operation and know everything that's going on in the right of way. I think it will help with our ability to monitor that and make sure that restoration follows closely.
But specifically to Windsor Heights, that may present an opportunity if they are struggling and have needs, and we have this position and have a level of expertise, that could definitely be something that for a fee, you know, if they're struggling and not having proper oversight and they desire a need, that we could contract out on them.
And that's where I was going with that. As we look at the workload, and trust me, I get it. It's a busy for us, and there's a lot of other things to do. But you know, there might be an opportunity to work with a collaboration with Windsor Heights on a fee for work basis, and a part-time basis. You know, again, just to explore that right there. Again, looking for ways to self-sustain this, just to add to that repertoire.
I think it makes good sense to at least offer it if we're able to get this position and get it stabilized in terms of and have that level of expertise in house. I don't know why we wouldn't, at least if they needed it, why we wouldn't at least have the discussion.
You know, monitor our capacity and see where this position's at and see what opportunities that provides. But that is something we can consider.
It'd be a good one to track, I think, at the very least, and trusting that we decide to move forward here. We're going to want to track this one pretty closely. And of course, you'll do that.
We have new software that'll
This
help
time
us
next
with
year.
that. Yes.
Other questions, council, on this? Matt, what
All
else?
right. We'll move on from Public Works to, unless there's any other questions there, to one of the questions that came up at the last City Council work session related to the general fund budget. And we were talking about the pay and benefits in terms of what the proposals were included in the budget, and an overall how it's determined the overall budgetary increase for the upcoming fiscal year. And so what provided in the memo is a couple different things, is that the history of pay and benefits for the city over time in terms of changes that have been made, at least over the last 8 years, and what I could remember in my time here. And then also how the 4% number that I showed in the budget in terms of how that number is developed. And so it's a combination of looking at the existing collective bargaining agreements with the police and firefighters, and then also coupling with that the pay matrix that was included as an appendix in your packet, which takes into account the CPI we usually take it from the October of the previous year. So this was October 2019. I included the current fiscal year's pay matrix, which was the CPI from the year before that. But how those things all in combination, when we kind of average them together, we determine, okay, what's maybe a citywide average that we may see for roll-ups of pay increases in a given budget year. And so to be conservative, we settle around a number that we know we can include in the budget that will stay within that mark, and that was 4% that we determined. And so that's taking a lot of those things all into combination. It's more of an art than a science, because we have a pay for performance system for the non-union that you see in the pay matrix. You don't know exactly where those numbers are going to fall at the end of the year, but we want to make sure that we're building a budget that is accounts for that pay for performance system and those collective bargaining agreements all within. So we provided that history and structure, and then also some comparisons of, I know that was a question that was brought up in terms of, okay, where do we sit within what other metro cities are proposing in their future, in their upcoming budgets, and included some bullet points of those cities, some of those cities. Now I took the names from the cities off of there because I wasn't sure if they've shared that information yet in their own budget process, so I didn't want to necessarily do that ahead of them. I didn't know where they were at in their budget process, but I can definitely share that with the council after this in terms of what cities are which. But as you can see, as you look at those various numbers, we really sit in the middle of that. And what's unique about our pay for performance system versus some other cities is on the non-union side, we don't have a step system on the non-union like some of these other cities do. So they might have a COLA or a cost of living adjustment, and depending on where the employee is at in their tenure, they may be eligible for a step or not. Because our system's kind of all combined together, it comes down to one number. So when you look at that and average to what some of the other cities are, we're very consistent with what you're seeing in the metro area, kind of right in the middle there. And in fact, you've got some cities, if they do have those step increases, are much higher than us. So wanted to share that comparison information and to give you some background as we go into the 2020-2021 pay matrix that will be brought before the council later this year. In comparison to what was included in your packet, the CPI for last October was 1.5. So that will be the new number that will be put in there at the top. And that same matrix will be utilized, at least proposed to be utilized. And as the many conversations that I have with the personnel committee, which I know John, Ted, and Scott are a part of that, we talk about the tweaks that we make continuously to this, or at least to explore that. And over a couple of years ago, we worked very hard to get it at a place where it was very stable in terms of how we treated the percentages of CPI with the market and with the performance evaluation rankings. And so we got that to a very stable point. And then we're in the process now of, as discussions between the Personnel Committee and the Employee Benefits Committee, of making some transitions on the comparison cities that we were utilizing. So previously we had 6 cities. We've always had 6 cities, but which 6 cities has changed over time. It's now much more metro focused. Before we had Ames and Iowa City in the mix as those comparison cities. Ames has now been changed out for Waukee, and then eventually Iowa City will be changed out for Altoona. So as Altoona grows larger than us from a population standpoint. So the 6 cities will now be primarily Des Moines metro kind of market focused. So there's continuous, reevaluations that we're making to this process, and having dialogue with the Employee Benefits Committee throughout that process to be able to bring these forward. So I just wanted to kind of give that holistic background of where all those numbers come from, and that there's a lot that goes into it that I wanted just to provide that background. And if there's any other additional questions or comments on at least the wage side, and then I'll talk about the health insurance side here too.
Council, questions on this? Ted, I know, and John, if you have comments from a Personnel Committee perspective.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think it's very fair. I think, it's merit-based. We're including the CPI. I think it's a very fair approach for both the employees and the city. So I'm good with it.
John, anything?
Well, I concur. I just, in my notes here, I wrote exactly that down, Ted. So we're on the same page there. The other thing, 2 other points I would add to that is that our most valuable asset is our employees. We have an extraordinary group of employees here in the city. And I think when we had our banquet not too long ago, the term that was used, I think, by Matt and others was a secret sauce. That we are so fortunate here to have excellent employees. And I think it's incumbent on us as members of the council to ensure that we do have a fair system, and that we reward the employees and make sure they get the compensation that they deserve. And we want to keep that culture that we have. So.
Yeah, no question about it. I think going back a number of years ago, before we arrived at the system that we have, which, by the way, I think it's important to remember and to have perspective and remember the context of what we're dealing with here. And look from where we came with our merit-based system and our compensation system to what we have now, and something that our employees have been very much a part of with us as a team over the years to get to where we are today. And it's taken us a number of years to do that. These things don't happen overnight, but you keep working at it. And so I'm pleased with where we are. So anyway, I guess that's all I have to
I
add.
think we're all on the same page.
Eric, do you have anything to?
No, I concur with what you said and don't have any questions.
Then the last thing I wanted to mention on this is we did include a summary in there of kind of where on the health insurance side, where we stack up. And I think, as you will see in there, very competitive, particularly from the cost of our plans to some neighboring communities, and then the employee contribution percentages. I think we're right in the mix there and very comparable. I'm very happy with when I look at that particular attachment, a spreadsheet that was included about where the cost of our single and family plans are relative to some of our, we'll call it competitors for lack of a better term, some of our neighboring cities. And I think that's a credit to our employees in terms of the cost of our health plans and the work that they do to take care of themselves and their families, and also participating in our wellness program to keep those premiums where they're at. We're seeing increases just like everybody's seeing increases on a regular basis, and also credit to the discussions we've been having about over time how the employees are stepping up and participating more in those increases as a percentage of the total premium. Those have been negotiated in the collective bargaining agreements, also in discussions with the non-union staff as well. So I think there is definitely a shared effort there related to our health insurance plans, and those will be things that we reevaluate in terms of do we have the right plan design, are the deductibles at the right level. We added the high deductible plan a number of years ago, and that's been a successful plan. We've seen people want to participate in that plan, and then starting to reevaluate now with healthcare seems to be changing every year, and so how do we keep up with that and maintain a competitive system for us will be important. But I thought that spreadsheet would be very helpful to kind of see the comparisons across all the different plans that some of our neighboring communities have in relation to ours. So wanted to provide that.
I think another comment that's been made is, and over the years, many people have made it, they've compared us to the private sector. And I'm in the private sector, all of us up here in the private sector. But that's not where we're competing for employees.
Correct.
We're competing with the cities around us, and that's what we work hard to stay competitive with and to benchmark against as we do our strategic hiring and benefits management and everything else that goes along with that. Anything else on this topic, Council?
I'll just reinforce the data that we have in the packet clearly shows we are in line with what we're doing and that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, we've come a long way, just like the pay matrix. The one thing I would throw out there is, I know Susan has some really strong opinions on this topic, so I would make sure to get with her on this as well, just to see where she's at with it. But she's always had some very strong opinions on this one.
Yep. I had a conversation with her on Tuesday, just kind of telling her what was in the packet, and love to follow up and have further conversation before she left on her trip. So, and I once she's had a chance to review that, I imagine we would have a follow-up conversation at some point. The last thing that I have then related to the budget then is just the kind of final direction, next steps. What included in the memo was kind of the summary of all the policy questions related to the budget for both road use, tax funding, and utility funds related to the public works budget, and then the general and trust and agency funds related to all the general fund departments. The rate increases outlined for water, sewer, and stormwater, this right-of-way specialist position that we talked about earlier, and the additional fee changes to go along with that to provide some revenue support, about half for that position. And then the bigger general fund questions related to the 3 patrol officer positions in terms of the addition of those, and then the additional building inspector position in the community development. So that just wanted to summarize kind of all those questions, see if or policy questions, and see if the council needed any further clarification beyond what we discussed tonight. and then kind of walking through the next steps following that in terms of the additional step that now it will be in place at the next meeting, where there'll be the additional public hearing as required by state law related to the maximum property tax authorization, a resolution that will ask the council to exceed the 2% threshold, which requires a supermajority vote for approval of that resolution. So that's the new steps in the process that the Iowa legislature added during the last legislative session. And then following that action, then you'll be setting your normal public hearing for the first meeting in March for the consideration of the budget itself. So that this resolution I just talked about is just related to the property tax revenue side. And then it's normal process from there, back to the budget consideration, public hearing at the first meeting in March, and a normal regular majority consideration of that in March. So just kind of wanted to walk through those next steps and those policy questions. So I'll be happy to entertain any clarifications needed on those and the council's any additional feedback on direction related to those policy questions, Your Honor.
Matt?
Well, I'll just make a quick comment. You know, as we talked about, we're looking at absorbing or taking on quite a few additional employees this year, which is more so than normal years. You know, we talked about the timing of that with some of the TIF money coming off the books, which will help. And so it kind of makes sense for this year. But once we add that, those expenditures, they don't go away, right? They're kind of perpetual. So it's just something that we're going to have to really monitor going forward, because that's taken on a lot of additional expenditures.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. You know, when you look at adding 5 FTEs, obviously that's a significant investment, but that's really what it is an investment in what we're doing right now. It's spread out across a number of departments. The directors have justified to me that does need to happen. I'm okay with that. From a long-term sustainability, especially as we look at build-out right there, those are the challenges that we have to face. And Matt, I know, you're working hard to do that. That does concern me a little bit, not now, but 10 years, 15 years down the road, that we know that build-out is coming right there, that we need to look at really what we're doing right there. But I think for right now, I think we're on the right path.
John, anything to add?
I'm fully supported.
All right, I have what you need. So this will be, we'll propose this budget then, include all the documentation as for the February consideration, the next week's meeting, February 13th. And then we will prepare that budget as proposed for your public hearing in March. So I have all I need, Your Honor, on this particular item.
Very good. Is there anything else?
So do we have anyone that wants to make a comment that's in the gallery, or asking?
Too late.
I think we're good, yeah. Okay, then we're going to move on to discussion item number 2, which is the City of Clive Strategic Plan Quarterly Update, February 2020.
I'll take that as well, Your Honor.
Okay, Matt?
First off, I'm gonna.
Except Mr. Henderson has to stay for the entire meeting.
I think he has other duties. Yeah.
We can't afford that.
Dennis, thank you for being here. Matt, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Thank you, Your Honor. So first thing, kind of looking forward to the 2020 workshops for strategic planning. I know the weekly update last Friday proposed some kind of modified dates. So after a lot of work with the 6 of you, I think we got it figured out. And so just wanted to, I've got you together, just really reconfirm those. And then my intent would be to follow up with some meeting notices for you all. And I did confirm this with Susan when I talked to her on Tuesday, so she's good with these dates. And I think Ted and the mayor, I think I may be ready to talk to you. But August 20th is a Thursday. It would be from our normal kind of 3 to 9 p.m. Session. This would be council and staff together. And then Saturday, August 22nd, that would be a morning session from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., kind of our typical morning session. And then a little bit different, there'll be a little bit of a gap between those 2 sessions and the last one. And that will be Friday, August 28th. It'll be an afternoon, so like 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. And that would round out the council workshops, and then we'll intermix the staff ones. So I just wanted to take a quick minute there just to reaffirm that with all of you and then get those locked in, and we'll have those for August, so.
And in between, on the 27th of August, we'll have our regular council meeting?
We'll still have the regular meeting on the night of the 27th. So yeah, that's the tricky part, is it gets mixed in with regular council meetings
Right.
too. So we tried to, but we'll have a gap there where we'll do kind of all, 2/3 of the work that week before, and then Lyle will come back, and then we'll have Thursday with staff, Friday with council, and that seemed to work for everybody after we went back and forth a little bit. So
And it was, the 28th was afternoon.
it'd be a Friday afternoon. We'd have lunch, lunch through 4 p.m. probably. You know, that's that last session where we kind of do the last rankings, and then you guys discuss governance, things like that, so.
Matt, where are you looking at a location for these, the work?
Most likely here, somewhere in this area to be most convenient. I know we wanted to explore some new thoughts on that, and so I wanted to get these dates first, and then we were gonna kind of look at some opportunities to keep it here more locally.
Are you gonna be sending calendar invites on those?
Yep,
Okay.
I will. I won't have the location, but I'll have the date blocks, the time blocks. So, all right. So with that, just jumping into the update then, it was included in your packet. Obviously, there's a long list of a lot of action items, but mainly wanted to focus on if there were specific questions. Staff did a great job of kind of providing me updates on where a lot of the things were at in terms of dates and modifications of what's done and what's in progress. And so we talked about a little bit of that tonight and related to some of the budget items, and with the zoning ordinance discussion coming up here shortly, that you'll notice that's included in here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But wanted to see if there's any specific questions on where our progress on any kind of policy, top and high priority items, management agenda, top and high priority items. I know it's a long list, but we really wanted to focus on if there was any questions or concerns with where the staff is at this.
Do you have
at
any
this point.
updates on Station 43 with Urbandale, where they are and where we stand with that?
I haven't got any recent updates other than our understanding was it was going to be operational sometime this month, but we haven't got a hard date yet from them. So I don't have any additional news at this point.
Other questions on strategic plan? Okay, Matt.
All right. So that's, again, we'll provide this update again in May with our work session being canceled in May due to the DC trip. We'll just provide it as part of the regular meeting, that first regular meeting in May, which will be that second Thursday. So with that, that's all I have on this item, Your Honor. We can move on to item number 3.
Item number 3 is general regulations, ordinance revision.
Evening, Council, Mayor. I have a lot of paperwork. Give me just a sec. All right, so as you know, staff has been working on updating our general regulations section of our zoning code. So it includes quite a few items, and then we're looking at adding some new items as well. So 2 of these groups have been through planning and zoning already, 2 of them have not. So the first couple sets of items are more robust than the last 2 sets because they haven't been in front of planning and zoning yet. So I was really just looking for discussion on these items. If you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, things I can look into, things like that. So I'm really just looking for a discussion. I don't have to talk the whole time, so. All right, so some overall objectives we're looking for here is just to update the code. It hasn't been updated in quite a while, so get some of those things in there for modern development, increase usability for users. Code language is always difficult for people to understand. Organize things a little bit better, use some plain language guidelines, include things like more photos, tables, illustrations, make it really easy for people to read and understand. Use shorter sentences, get rid of some jargon in there. I think I told Plan Commission, I think the longest sentence I found was 75 words. When you read that many words in one sentence, it's difficult to understand what it has said from start to finish. So cleaning up the code in some of those ways will just help the usability of it. So I have this broken down into 4 groups. It was 3, that's why I have 2 sets of 2s. That was for time reasons for planning and zoning. And those topics are pretty robust, so it was going to end up being really long anyway. And then there's a couple new sections in each of those 2 to kind of split it up a little bit. Like I said, the first 2 have been to planning and zoning, the second 2 have not. So just some of these will be brief, some of these will be long, but feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any time. So quickly, our first 4 sections are just introductory sections. They just lay out what general regulations does, things that it observes, jurisdiction, nonconformities, things like the scope. So all we're looking for here was just update some wording, do some plain language guidelines here, just to clean it up a little bit. And then just a word on nonconformities. Sometimes this is a little confusing, but our code currently has, if something's been discontinued or abandoned for 6 months, to be brought into conformance. Staff wasn't looking at any changes to that. If you have any thoughts on it, just wanted to include a slide for that.
It's been abandoned. How is it being brought into conformance?
If it was already a non-conforming use, so it's been grandfathered in because it's been that use for a substantial amount of years, something has changed in the code, maybe the zoning is different or the use is no longer permitted in that area anymore. If that business leaves, then if it's been vacant for more than 6 months and the same use has not re-entered that space, then they would have to be brought into conformance, meaning if it was a use, that use couldn't return to that location anymore.
Which makes sense,
Right.
actually. I wish it could be a shorter time frame than that, to be honest. Just, that's my thought. Ted?
Well, if it's abandoned though, how are you enforcing that? That's the only thing.
Be for the next, I imagine, the next
guess.
comment.
Again, just to kind of give some context to this particular section, this is one that staff uses a fair amount of, because this is the way, if changes are made in zoning regulations over time, this is the provision that allows for a property to become in compliance with the more contemporary or current standard. So in the case of the photo, you may recall this is a property on 78th Street. It was a single-family residential use for decades. It was, as part of our zoning, zoned commercial. So it was no longer able, once the occupant left for more than 6 months. The new buyer, owner of that property was not able to use it for residential purposes. So they had to convert it to a more traditional commercial use. In this particular case, the outcome is okay, but in other projects where we've used this provision, it is a way for us, again, to take an older or dilapidated or non-conforming property and get some measure or some level of upgrade to it. This doesn't provide the fix like we would maybe like it to be for some of the properties that we've had to deal with, but this is the tool or the lever that does give us the authority to try and bring things into a conformance with more contemporary standards. You can make changes, you can shorten up time periods, you can do other things. However, we do need to be cautious because there is a fair amount of case law associated with our abilities as a community to enforce this provision. So we are not proposing any changes in it, but if you'd like us to research or dig deeper, we can certainly do that.
All right. So vision clearance is the next section. So what we're looking at here, vision clearance just refers to a street corner. So that area where, cars are traveling, pedestrians are in the area, you want to make sure that visibility is good throughout the corner of the right-of-way. So what we're looking to do here is include areas like driveways and sidewalks that are not on a corner. Those are currently not in the code. So just to make those areas safer, I have the next slide looks at these a little closer. considering allowing staff to do get some engineering analysis if we need to update our illustration. This is a better picture than what's in the code. The code doesn't have a great photo for this. And allowing some other standards if we need to for certain situations. So for the driveways and sidewalks, this is a couple examples. Oops. So the top photo is in Clive. As you can see, when someone is pulling out of the driveway, those big bushes are there. If someone's walking on the sidewalk, it is a visibility issue. The lower picture is a residential property. This is not in Clive. I didn't want to use a Clive property. It's kind of the same issue. We probably wouldn't enforce something like this unless it was a complaint or an issue. But right now in the code, we just don't address it at all. So if there was a concern, maybe it's a highly used sidewalk next to a school, very busy and traveled, things like that. We don't have any way to enforce things like this. Any thoughts on this one? All right.
And that's for both residential and commercial, then, correct?
I mean, we could propose both, but if we feel strongly one way or the other.
Like to be fair across the board.
Right. And
It
again,
applies to both now, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It would apply to both now, correct?
We don't have anything that's for driveways. It's just for street-to-street intersections. So those driveways for commercial or residential just aren't addressed in the code.
But you want to address them,
Correct.
and you would address both.
Correct.
That's,
Yeah, that's.
I'm sorry, yes.
yeah.
Thank you, though, but you've answered my question.
Sure.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right, so street frontage, we're looking at a few changes here. Currently, lots have minimum frontages, but there's quite a few places within the city that there's some open area behind already improved lots that are just not accessible without a smaller frontage. So essentially, we are looking to create kind of flag lot standards. So those things don't have to just go through a bunch of hoops and everything to get these kind of things approved. We can just put it in the code, so by right, we know if that dimensions are gonna work for a property. They don't have to jump through a bunch of extra hoops to get that kind of thing approved. So we're looking to create some flag lot dimensions, reducing dimensions for residential to 20 feet, allowing some easements in certain circumstances, and then consider moving this section in part to the residential and commercial sections where lot size and coverage and things like this are already discussed. Next topic is subdivision associations. This one's pretty straightforward. It just lays out a set of rules for creating subdivision associations. It just needs a small update because the state of Iowa made a code change. So that's all we're looking to do with subdivision associations, is just to update the wordage a little bit.
Do we have any requirements regarding when that goes from the developer to the homeowners? Or is that neighborhood by neighborhood?
We do not have a code provision that identifies that trigger point. Typically, what we have seen in practice, because those documents are proposed by the developer, we will review them for compliance and ensure that the minimum standards are there. But for the most part, the developers have pretty broad liberty to craft them the way that they'd like. And what we are seeing is the developer maintains the kind of sole power of the association until they have sold or conveyed the last parcel that they own in the subdivision. It obviously gives them the flexibility to make changes or adjustments as necessary while they still have an interest in the project. And obviously that can cause some concerns depending on how long a project or subdivision plays out through the construction. But
In your opinion, should we have something? Because that does seem, to me, a little extreme. because they could have one lot remaining in the subdivision for years.
There's obviously, whenever we're writing code, there's a tension between kind of the overregulation and what are you trying to accomplish versus allowing people to kind of sort their own problems out. The developer not transitioning over the ownership or oversight of the association doesn't change any of the parameters of the association. Whatever's in the document, the association's still responsible for X, Y, or Z or whatever maintenance. The issue is really that the homeowners or the property owners just don't have the opportunity to engage or be involved necessarily until later on in the process. Is that something that the city needs to regulate or kind of be in the middle of? Again, I'm definitely torn on that because we are not involved in really any administration of the association. And I'm not sure that we.
And we don't want to, yeah. Okay.
Because we have examples of this right now where we're at that transition point. And there's one lot that's just been hanging for a long time. And
Sure.
it's, do you really want to get in the mix? Does the city really want to get in the mix on that? And concerns that may be.
I can
more
see
of a
both
civil
sides on
matter.
that one.
Yeah.
I would lean towards wanting to empower the homeowners, but, no. Okay.
Thank you. All right, small wind energy conversion systems. This is a pretty straightforward, robust section of the code. All of our metro neighbors have pretty much identical wordage for this. What we're looking to do is not really make any changes. Most people don't want to really have a lot of these types of things, especially for residential use. Most people aren't just putting up windmills left and right. So we don't really see any problems with it. The only thing we're looking for is to possibly add a section for solar, and if so, combine these so all of our renewable energy systems are just in one place.
And again, this one was one that was a hot topic now probably almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, quite a while ago.
It was one that we addressed as a metro area in terms of trying to build the regulations. And again, just to refresh your memory, the regulations that are on the books generally, certainly not technically, but practically prohibit windmills on residential property. So again, that's the question that we asked P&Z and certainly want to make sure that you folks have a chance to weigh in on. Are we still okay with that, or do we want to be more flexible? We do not and have not had much interest from homeowners because I think in practice they're kind of playing out as not being very efficient or really able to generate a lot of electricity based on that suburban residential setup. So we don't see that there'd be a huge demand, but we are pretty heavy-handed in terms of what you can and can't do in a residential property.
You have Doug, is there like a 2-acre minimum requirement if you're gonna have one? That's my recollection anyway.
Yeah, and what makes them, again, practically hard to justify is really the height that are allowed above the roof line. In essence, they have to tuck in behind the roof pitches, so the wind doesn't have a chance to really get to them that much. The other separation setbacks, again, play it out, but you can still do them. You just have to be in the rear of the property or the rear of the house and kind of tucked behind the ridge line, which, again, practically makes the purpose.
Look, I remember we had this conversation a number of years ago. I think our concern was, people building, 100-foot turbines in their backyard and affecting the neighbors with sight and noise, et cetera. Is this something we need to relook at as the technology on turbines has certainly changed over the past number of years and certainly with smaller units as well? I think right now our ordinance is prohibitive of this type of home use, but as the technology changes and it becomes more efficient and maybe more accepted, Is this something we need to relook to, that people might be interested in?
I think a lot of the fears that were initially put out have probably been dispelled based on time and technology. I don't know that the technology is going to overcome our limitation on where it can be placed. So, the ideas and concerns around noise, the generator sounds, the light flicker from spinning blades, things of that nature, I think most of that has been disproven. But the only way to make them functionally useful is to allow them to be much higher above the roof lines.
How many permits do we have right now?
Permits,
If any?
again, my recollection might be off, and maybe you researched it, but I know we did one. And I know that got taken down several years after it went up because it just wasn't working. So again, we just don't have a lot of demand for it, just because you're not really going to generate a whole lot. But if we are going to allow it, it would really be setting the stage to allow that height.
Right.
That's the only way it's going to work.
the problem is not there.
Yeah, I was going to
I'm not
say,
sure that
if you want to open that can of worms. Okay.
We vetted that pretty thoroughly, I
Yeah.
think. But you did mention solar, and I'm interested in the kind
That's
of
next.
interest you have in that. And
All right, so we had looked at a number of things for solar. What Plan Commission came back with was they were really comfortable with allowing rooftop units, but not really anything for ground-mounted units. This is my original slide. I had some things in for our neighboring cities. The most I sort of found for ground-mounted units, they limited a square footage, something like 200. No more than 6 feet at the highest peak, because the system does typically need to move a little bit or be positioned to best catch the sun. Where that's easy to do on a roof, it's not quite as easy to do, especially in a backyard or something. But as I said, Planning and Zoning felt really strongly about just not permitting ground-mounted units, but then not really having a lot of prohibitive measures for rooftop units. So if you can fit it on the roof and it's on a side that you can catch the sun, go for it. We do have a number of rooftop units in Clive as is. I don't think we've had complaints, you recall, on those. So that's kind of the summary from Planning Commission or Planning and Zoning on solar units, if that's agreeable to you.
And the only thing I'd add to that is the reason we're bringing this to you is because today we have no regulations on solar application. If you want to put it on the roof, get an electrical permit, make sure it's structurally sound, and knock your socks off. Same thing if a request came in to be placed on the backyard or in the rear yard, we'd have some limitations as it relates to accessory structures. But today, again, not that somebody would, but they could build an entire solar array over their entire backyard if they wanted to right now. So again, because this technology is continuing to evolve and become a little more profitable, if you will, we thought it was most appropriate to try to address it one way or the other. Allow it, don't allow it, and if you're going to allow it, what are the parameters for allowing it?
Solar glare hazard analysis, would that be a vendor-based or a contract-based, or how would?
It typically comes with the unit. It's a pretty standard thing from what I found. So depending on what vendor you're purchasing your solar panels from or your units from, they're going to have that analysis already done.
And the issue, again, a little bit of it is myth versus the reality in it, but certainly in some applications, if the angle is just right, there had been reports that the concentration of that glare would have the ability to melt vinyl siding on an adjacent structure. Certainly there were concerns about, again, with the right orientation, that glare might be offensive in terms of somebody's enjoyment of their backyard. But again, a lot of the technology today is now structured in a way that the glare is minimized substantially by the coatings that are on the facilities. So again, I think a lot of that probably falls into the myth side of it based on today's technology. But there still are those potential risks associated with it.
So when we say ground-mounted units are completely screened from view, does that just mean from the front yard, or does that mean from any angle? I mean,
I think ground-mounted units, if we wanted to allow them, it'd be something that would be a rear yard only, and then you'd need probably a privacy fence or some way to screen it
yeah,
completely.
lots of
whether
houses
that's-
that back up to each other,
Right.
right, that are back to back, that if I'm in the street, I can't see in their backyard, but if I'm their backyard neighbor, I could see it. So does it have to be screened from that?
That's a good question.
I would hope not, because
Right, and again, I think,
if I'm a homeowner and I want to be able to do it, I think I should be able to do it.
right, and that's where I think other communities have tried to say, yeah, you can do it in the backyard, but you gotta screen it. Well,
What does that mean?
what does that really
Yeah.
mean, particularly in suburban environments when we're all creating walkouts? and
Right.
The higher decks that you're looking down into these, I think, again, they try to say, or limit that height to 6 feet in theory, because 6 feet is the allowable height for a privacy fence. So whether or not the owner is responsible to put the screening fence up to hide their unit, the adjacent property owners would have the ability to place their own 6-foot fence to address their concerns if they had any. But again, from the discussions and the way that we've looked at it, the ideas that P&Z presented with respect to keeping them on the roof is fine. Having them ground mounted is maybe something, again, that isn't consistent with the suburban environment that we have in our neighborhoods.
Could I ask that we look at that solar glare hazard analysis piece before we require it, to see if it's a general certificate that comes out with all these? So I've used solar and have a house with solar on it. I don't ever remember the analysis. You're right, though. I mean, where we are with technology, and if we're putting it up on the roof of Metro Waste Authority and East Village as well, about the whole roof will be covered, but there is very little, I hate to say none, but I've never, whether it's landfill or any of the facilities we have, I don't see that glare anymore, just because the material.
Right, they make them non-reflective.
Analysis, and maybe that's just because of who put them in, they have them, but West Des Moines is where I have one on the roof of a house. I didn't have to do any of that. I'm not saying we have to mimic them, I've just never heard of those.
Sure. I found it in my research, it doesn't need to be something we require at all.
Rick?
Some of you toured Mike Mormon's house. Mike was with Shy Battery, lives right across the street from me.
Yeah.
Had solar power for a number of years. Never did we have glare. I was concerned with it. Talked to Mike ahead of time. Never once was there any glare into my home.
I do, since you walked up though, I've always wondered about the fire department side of it. So you see that roof, that's like my roof of a house, and traditional axe isn't going through this, right? Or saw.
Yeah, you're not going to do that. You're going to go through the side of the house. The companies actually provide training, and a lot of times they'll have supplemental energy kills on the side of the house. So just something additional we have to be familiar with. But they will stay energized. But yeah, you're not going to go through those and try to ventilate a roof.
Good question.
So again, I think the real big thing for this discussion is, again, we don't need a regulation. We can just simply allow people to do what they want to do if that's our choice, which is what we're doing today. Or do we need to have some level of responsible regulation? And then if we are, the two applications are really roof mounted and then ground mounted. So if we have some thoughts of direction within that vein, we certainly appreciate it.
It seems reasonable to determine what those regulations would be, if it's something that's coming. And again, I don't know what the demand is. I know very little, about it, but if you're seeing demand coming, then
Clive has,
If McCoy's doing it, then everybody's probably gonna start doing it.
Somebody on the other end of the table is doing it too.
Well, then we definitely better get some.
Horse out of the barn.
That's my neighbor.
Horse out of the barn. Regulations, I think are good. I mean, we can ease into them though, can't we?
Yeah, I
Just
think
get a
some
chapter
basic
started
parameters,
with-
right? Not-
sure,
Again, this
sure.
is wide open, and that's kind of what this point of discussion is. Where do you feel comfortable in terms of?
This is different, in my mind, this is different than a moving wind turbine.
Right.
You know, in terms.
Kind of a homeowner's
In terms of the effect,
option,
in terms of
right?
the real
Yeah.
effect on people around you.
Yeah.
But I definitely think we need to look at it to some level, to a reasonable level.
Yeah, and I think it's coming. I think it's getting more efficient right there. I want to have our citizens have that option if they want to without, disenfranchising their neighbors and creating other issues. But I think we definitely need to address it in a responsible way.
Just a minimalistic approach.
I would agree. I
start
want to
with
be
that.
draconian.
So I hear that, and that's great feedback. Do we have a preference with respect to roof versus ground? Again, roof seems to be pretty innocuous. Ground, again, maybe has a little different situation where it's kind of in backyards and visible to a greater degree from, those adjacent backyard property owners.
I mean, is there a need for a rooftop regulation? It doesn't seem like to me, just at my perch, that we would need any kind of regulation around that.
The regulation would more than likely, again, kind of based on the discussion is, if you would like to put it on your roof, knock yourself out, get the right permits
It permits it,
Yeah.
yeah.
and so forth.
Regulation
But
permits it.
it's yours to kind
Right.
of figure out.
I think that's the right approach. yeah.
But again, roof versus ground is still, again, in my mind, the differentiation.
But this regulation would cover residential and commercial both, right? And so do we have, I couldn't pick one, but do we have any commercial that may utilize the ground mount, over? And then how will you deal with, so at the new recycling facility, we're not going to the roof, we're going to cover parking with solar. Is that okay? On the roof regulation, is that a roof? Or would that be a ground mount?
Again, that's
That's a hot thing right now is
absolutely.
parking, covered parking in apartments, condos, commercial buildings to start being picked up. You see it in the East Village more and more. We'll be doing it out there. It's a lot easier to do it on the parking stalls, canopies, and then you have climate, but you're not doing it on your roof, flat roof or anything like that.
And again, I think the differentiation is probably in a commercial setting, as you're kind of talking about, it probably has less potential to be problematic. If someone in their backyard wants to put, a full backyard full of solar arrays, again, doesn't really bother me. However, I know our suburban environment, and it's certainly something that I think needs to be.
I think we need to define that screened from the rear view. We need to tighten that up a little bit too.
Yeah, again, when it comes to that, I think it is a bit of a fruitless effort. You either are going to allow them in the backyard, and whether or not you put a 6-foot fence around them, that's fine. But that's really going to be about the functional limit of any practical screening. You're just not, how many different view lines or what else are you going to try to screen? A 6-foot fence is going to be.
If a homeowner wants to put it in their backyard, you let them put it in their backyard. It's their backyard. As long as it's not negatively impacting someone else by melting their siding or something, then I don't know, to me, that's their homeowner's right.
Well, I think Councilmember McCoy would be a perfect person to lead a focus group.
Doug, do you have the ability to allow ground mounted on commercial and not on residential? I mean, you have that flexibility. You don't run into any issues with that. Just another thought for the council to consider
We
too
start with that.
is you could allow all types of installations on commercial property with certain requirements, and then maybe just start with roof mounted on residential, and then have maybe because there's always provisions, at least, and I'm not as familiar, but I mean, by right or what's by conditional special permit if you wanted to do a ground mounted on residential, and there'd have to be certain requirements, or am I getting a little too far in the weeds of?
No, those are all very viable ways of regulating it. There is no protected status for solar at this point, so if the city says that commercial is okay and residential is only okay on the roof, that would be fine. If you wanted to allow some flexibility for the rear yard, you could absolutely make that a special use or some type of higher burden of approval. All of those are viable options. Once you kind of dial us in on
I mean, I think that makes
what's gonna
sense.
work.
On a case-by-case basis.
Ground mounted.
Yeah.
At least you can review it.
Right.
Have a process to review it if there's a legitimate, if somebody's got a very large yard.
Right.
And we have some of those in Clive that, and they wanted to just put a small array ground mounted, you could say, well, they just have to get a special use permit and then go through the process, and staff can review it and provide a recommendation, and then you allow everything else by right.
Yeah, I think that's a good compromise.
Excellent.
I guess I have to say that. So same with commercial on the wind though, right? So you look at the church on Ashworth, they've got a wind turbine. And to my knowledge, it produces real credits, right? So do we allow churches to do the turbines?
The way our ordinance is structured, and we kind of focus on residential just because that's the most likely source of confrontation.
Yeah.
Our code definitely allows small wind energy in commercial applications. We just haven't had any takers at this point. But our regulations are very similar, again, to our neighbors. So the church in West Des Moines, if we had a church in Clive that wanted to do it, there's a path forward for that.
But not the resident.
No, again, we don't prohibit.
But if we did, I mean, if,
You could. Again, it's not a protected area, so you can regulate it however you would like.
All right, so to wrap those two up, we were just looking at if both wind and solar, we already have the wind, if solar was approved, we'd be looking at just putting those two things together possibly. This picture also is not plausible. It's a metaphor for putting the two together.
that's not,
Ask that question.
Don't freak out.
I thought that was Pete's house.
Future Pete's house.
I don't know, B.
So we'll look into those energy or solar questions, and I'll bring that back to you in a future presentation. So to kind of follow up on group one, I think I got through everything that Plan Commission had discussed. I don't think, I'll look into those solar questions and some other notes I jotted down and bring those back in a future meeting. All right, group two. So for yards, our yards chapter mainly just covers really specific circumstances for corner lots and how that secondary front yard is calculated. So what we were looking at for that, not really proposing too many changes, but just putting these items together, because we have a lot of sections that talk about things with yard coverage, and it gets confusing when they're kind of all over the place. So it's really just discussing yard coverage to an extent, and we think that can just be combined with another chapter, but we weren't looking for any changes here, unless there was any thoughts on secondary front yards, existing lots.
Well, Doug, when would I ask about, you and I have had discussions about the amount of concrete we allow in backyards, but it's fair game in front yards to be the entire yard can be concrete.
It's coming up,
Okay.
not this proposal.
Thank you. All right.
We're getting there. These are in order, by the way.
Real in my hood.
You lay awake.
That's real. No, it's real in my hood.
Good to know. We weren't really looking for too many changes with home occupations either. There was some concerns that got brought up in planning and zoning, and we addressed those with some more history on why we have the code the way we do. Currently, there's the 3 levels of no impact, very minor, or major that requires a special use permit. We're not proposing any changes here unless something comes out of the short-term lodging that we may need to throw into home occupations just to kind of cover our bases on that.
Do you have a sense of counts? I'm just curious because obviously we had a long debate and discussion on this one, well, 5 or 6, 7 years ago now, 6 years
Long is
ago.
an understatement, Matt.
Yes. I was just curious on, I guess, staff's, where are we at on that in terms of registrations, minor impact, major impact? How has that application fared since we, went through quite a bit to craft the regulations that are in place?
Kelly had given me a list at a time. This was weeks ago, so I'm not sure if I have it with me.
Well, as you're looking for it,
Could be
just
a fault.
Yeah, you probably know off the top of your head.
anecdotally, in terms of the requests that we have that have come in, we think that the tiered process works very well. Those folks that are, again, doing those very minor, I'm working in office out of my house kind of things, gives us the ability to just permit that right away, let people just get on with their business. We do have those areas now where it was a situation where they had an employee, which previously was not permitted, but that allows us to, again, manage those small applications without having to go board of adjustment or other actions. So that has been very effective. And then with the major impacts, we've had a few requests go through the board of adjustment. And again, that process, I think, is appropriate in that it gives the property owner the opportunity to ask and provide, they can provide a reasonable justification and identify that they're not going to have an impact to their neighbors. And it gives the neighbors the opportunity to come and be involved in that decision process. We feel that that's been effective as well. So again, I think our regulation, although it was challenging to get through the last time we did it, I think it's an effective application of the zoning ordinance.
And it was litigated once, but that never, it was dropped. The recall was an animal.
Animal rescue.
Animal rescue,
facility in
yeah.
a residential neighborhood.
And that was dropped.
Major impact.
Yeah.
That went through the board of adjustment.
That pool deal calmed down.
Yeah, that gentleman moved, and the folks who run the pool, their daughter moved in next door, so.
That took care, and the Weaver boys continued to
again.
swim.
Thank you, Doug, for that. It just good
What's
to
next?
reflect on that.
All right, so next is our exceptions, modifications, interpretations section. This covers a lot of exceptions, things like roof height for various types of buildings that need to be taller for a number of reasons. Front yard exceptions are also listed here. And then we have things like ordinary projections as they relate to a front yard. This is a pretty vague area, so staff has been kind of looking into what that could entail and really some more information on that. So we could talk about your concrete issue here. Wait.
Yeah.
I can wait. Yeah.
The yard coverage is the one.
A lot of, yeah,
That's the next one.
it's mentioned in a lot of different places for what it is. So this chapter, we were looking at making a new section for yard coverage to just put all these things together to make it easier for people to understand. So yeah, we were looking for a reduced percentage in front yard and side yards for yard coverage, especially to take care of some of the stormwater management and mitigation, but possibly give people some more flexibility in the rear yard if they, wanted to put in like a large pool or something like that, but they had lots of other room in other spaces. So just to give them some more flexibility, or if there was some stormwater management options, maybe they could increase coverage a little bit if they had mitigation somewhere else on their property. So we were just kind of looking at some of those things to give people a little more flexibility in how they, want to put things on their property. So here we had, parking pads and that type of coverage as well.
Again, a little context to this one is, there are really two issues that we deal with quite a bit. One is, again, people continue to want to invest in their properties, particularly in those rear yards with large swimming pools, patios, gazebos, pool houses, etc. So we do run into the issue with the rear yards quite often. The regulation is that you're only allowed to have impervious surface coverage of 30% of that rear yard. So again, by the time you do the deck and the patio and the swimming pool and the little shed and everything else, that gets eaten up pretty quickly. So that is one area that, again, right, wrong, and different, we want to make sure that we're having a conversation about. The other area of discussion then is related primarily to the front yard. So presently, driveways and parking areas associated with vehicles are allowed. In theory, someone could pave their whole front yard that is a parking area, part of their driveway parking lot. And obviously that can cause some concerns. So trying to define what is an acceptable amount of impervious surface area in a front yard is probably something that should be addressed. And then, like I said, need to have some clarity on what our level of satisfaction is with respect to those rear yards. The principal issue with the impervious surface area is really twofold. One is related to the impact of stormwater. The more paving you have, the more runoff you have. And a lot of times, it's these things that are done after the fact in a built neighborhood. So, my drainage patterns are all set, and now I plop in a huge pool and patio and everything else, but I still have the water to go onto my neighbor, and it's coming more fast, it's coming in a higher intensity and rate. So stormwater management might be a way to help mitigate against allowing for larger installations in a rear yard. The front yard is less to do about stormwater and more to do about aesthetics and kind of that neighborhood character. But again, it could be mitigated in terms of the impervious surface area through stormwater management if that's the desire of the city. But that front and that rear yard coverage is something that, again, we're looking for a little dialogue on.
Doug, what's the interest in the side yards? What are you seeing there?
Side yards, again, for the most part, in our suburban environment, are, the houses are 8 foot. So it's 16 foot between. There's just not a lot of space to really functionally do anything.
And we're not talking about shrinking that space. We're talking about the coverage of that space.
Right.
Yeah.
And the side yard is really front of house to back of house and that 8 foot of width. So 30% of that really isn't a very large number. So it's not going to yield a very large patio or whatever other application. So, the 30% of that yard area probably is reasonable. It's really the front yard and the rear yard that, again, I think have the questions.
30% seems really low to me. I mean, I walk into houses all the time where I just did last week. I showed a house in Urbandale where probably 80% of the backyard was the swimming pool. Mm-hmm. I see that. That's not uncommon. So to me, 30% is crazy low. I mean, is there a way to, I hear what you're saying on the stormwater. That certainly makes sense. And is there a way to do that on a case-by-case basis? Special use permit kind of thing? Mm-hmm. I don't know. One size doesn't fit all, it seems to me, depending. And you don't want to hurt a homeowner. Again, if I want to put in a pool in my backyard, as long as I'm not affecting my neighbors, to me, I should be able to do that as a homeowner. So
Certainly, there are ways to mitigate it. In a lot of cases, it would simply be saying, let's have a setback, whatever, 5, 8, 7, 10 feet from side yard and rear yard, to help manage some of that runoff potential and also some of those shared edges that, again, are the ones that cause the tension. But other than that, knock yourself out. That's certainly an approach that could be had. Alternatively, whatever the percentage is, allowing it by right, I think, is probably the best way to do it. If stormwater is a concern, then we just simply write a regulation that says, you have to mitigate that stormwater impact from that new impervious surface area, which, again, should be relatively easy.
That seems like the approach, Doug.
Again,
As I
if
sit here
that's,
and listen to.
You could use pavers, you could use special pavers to get that back around your pool, you could use the special concrete, you could.
there's a ton of different techniques
Rain gardens
that can be
and
used for
where you need
managing
it.
stormwater. Again, from my perspective, that's a big issue with respect to impervious surface area, particularly in the backyards. The kind of aesthetic concern, again, if it's in your backyard, knock yourself out.
Absolutely.
The front yards, again, might be a little different animal, just because, again, that does set the stage for kind of an impact on the overall character.
That's the whole neighborhood then, yeah.
Of that neighborhood space. But again, you can treat the front and the rear completely different if that's the choice.
And a lot of the homeowners associations are covering many of these things that we're talking about, right?
Not so much in terms of a yard coverage. They may restrict the type of pool, above ground or above ground. They might restrict whether or not you can have a shed in the backyard or not.
Usually that shed would have to match the house, the siding,
Things of that
so
nature.
that, that it fits.
Sure. I mean, we've seen shake shingles, right, in country club.
But I don't,
They get as specific as that, literally. Well, you can't build a patio in the front of the house.
certainly, there are some of those.
So you're not going to be able to cover your entire front yard in concrete to park cars on. I've got to think that a lot of these, as we move into newer developments with these, but I don't know, maybe not.
Most of the covenants are not going to get that granular.
Okay.
If
A lot of those
you wanna have
condos and-
protection, you'd have to put it in your code, in my opinion.
Those townhomes and things are mostly concrete in the front, right? When you drive up to those, all that, I don't know what it's called, but
The most townhomes.
by Casey's off Hickman,
They're not gonna have yards.
the whole front is concrete parking, right?
And those are townhomes.
A townhome very well could be 25 feet wide, and they have a 20 or 22-foot wide driveway. 2 cars, just basic standard. We'd have to figure out ways to kind of manage those conditions, because that's not really what the intent, in my opinion, of this regulation
Yeah.
is to be.
I don't understand the difference though between stormwater control in the backyard. To me, just logically in my head, I'd say we should worry about the front yard as a city, because that's where our storm drains are. That's where our road is. That's where the collection and the speed of the water are going, is everything coming off those front driveways and all that, especially when it's all concrete, is hitting that street and going into those storm sewers and headed to the creek faster than anything in the backyard.
See it in the backyards all the time. That's where all the, between houses.
I don't disagree with the backyard. I'm just saying that I don't see why the front yard would be treated any different, because it's going directly to the streets, same as the backyard. I think it should be treated the same.
I agree. I would love to say, let's treat it all the same, have X number of impervious surfaces, square feet of impervious surface, and whenever you go above that, every square foot needs to be mitigated, regardless of where it's at. The issue with the front and rear for stormwater management is, actually, if you paved your whole front yard, the likelihood of you having an impact on a neighbor is pretty thin, because that water is all going to drain to the street, into the gutter, into a pipe, and no one's going to care.
University Boulevard would argue with you
Sure.
as a neighbor.
But in the rear yards, again, those drainage patterns are so fragile, the way that they're designed. Adding more water in terms of rate or volume can have significant impacts in kind of the use and enjoyment of people's rear yard properties, kind of their bread and butter, their usable space.
Yeah, we got to manage to that clearly, but in my mind, we need to relax this quite a bit and give homeowners a little bit more flexibility with what they want to do in their backyard, provided that we're not hurting the stormwater piece of it.
Something I would offer to the council too is this, if you do offer flexibility, but have maybe that with that flexibility comes the require for stormwater management, a rain garden or some kind of practice on the property. I think that starts to help speak to a broader question that this council is very passionate about, is the stormwater management, how we encourage our homeowners to start thinking about what they can even do on their own lawns. And so if you could almost have like an incentive, if you will, if you want that big patio or you want that, big practice in your backyard, as long as you can show that you're doing some mitigation related to it, and we can encourage that as a part of our regulation, that might be something also for the council to consider, because then it fits with that bigger vision of how we're doing stormwater management in our community.
Good. All right, the other new one for the fun one.
Don wanted the chicken brought up, reconsidered.
All right. Consider whatever you'd like. What we have currently in the code is incredibly vague for a lot of species of animals. So I put in here just our definition of livestock and then what we have currently keeping livestock. These are the only two things that regulate what you can and can't do with animals in the city, besides dog and cat licenses. That's kind of a whole nother thing. But beyond dogs and cats, animals that are outside, typically, this is really, really vague. So there's some things in here that just aren't covered at all. Things like bees, I have a slide on that next. So does that mean for the city, do we allow them or do we not allow them? If they're not in the code, does that mean you can have them? Or because they're not in the code, does that mean you can't have them? Well, that's up to interpretation. So to kind of get rid of some of that interpretation, we're looking to put something in the code. So I just started off, I have a slide on bees and a slide on chickens because I didn't think we probably want to discuss too much farther than that. So just your thoughts, if there's any concerns that you have. Planning and zoning were not agreeable to really anything beyond dogs and cats, but I'd like to hear your opinion.
I know nothing about bees, so I have no
Could
idea.
be based on property size.
Could. Some things I have on the slide, just some regulations that I found on bees. Some of these are from our neighbors, some of these are from bigger cities, but this is kind of just a good mix of what I found for types of regulations. So things like 2 hives, no more than 20 cubic feet in volume, so it physically limits the amount of bees that you can have. Things like setbacks, you can't have them closer than 10 feet away from homes, 25 feet away from public walkways or joining buildings. It'd be a residential use only, not like commercial beekeeping. They'd be permitted in a rear yard only. A lot of codes had the use of a flyway barrier, which is a physical barrier of some nature that makes the bees fly up out of the hive. So that can be row hedges were a good example of that, or some other type of item around the hive that makes the bees fly up and away. That could be a fence. They have to fly up over a fence to get to flowers and vegetation beyond the rear yard. So they aren't just kind of venturing out into neighbors' yards as much. They have to go up and away. So there's some research on that I found. And then if your hive shows any aggression, you have to recolonize it. So if that helps with some regulations that are currently out there for bees, that's what I found.
I haven't had people knocking down my door to want to have bees in the backyard, but I seem to hear more and more today about chickens.
We can talk about chickens.
Does Urbandale have an ordinance? Are they allowing that now?
I believe they are not.
They're not allowing that. It's not, okay.
Waukee recently had some action on chickens.
Do they allow it?
They got a lot more remote rural.
I have all my old sheets.
While you're looking that up, I guess I'd interpret the law a little different than maybe the professors and you guys that were researched it oddly, right? You're surprised. But I think Weaver might agree with me on this, and Clive, but if it's not in the ordinance, it's allowed. I mean, that's why you,
Well, that's the decision of the administrator.
well, I think that's just public law in general, that, I mean, that's state law, code. If it's not in there, by default, it's allowed. And then you write code to not allow something. So I'm not talking bees or anything, I'm just thinking, just in general law. Am I wrong, John? Or
Right, John?
you can agree with me and nobody will stop recording.
Well, I think we have legal counsel here that can answer that.
It looked like there was a prohibition that we currently have for livestock.
It'd be an interpretation that bees are a form of livestock and that they are then prohibited. And that's really the gist of what we're saying is, let's get clear. Do we allow bees or not? And just be clear about that.
I do still want to know what the answer to my question, but.
I know Urbandale had it was a college student that was studying environmental science. There wasn't anything in the code for it, so she thought she could have it. She had it was a Des Moines Register article I read, I believe it was 2016. Got a couple hives. No one even knew they were there for, I think, 6-8 months. A neighbor found out they were there, called the city. The city said, well, I guess you can't have it. So she had to get rid of it.
Yeah, that seems.
So, that's the confusion that it causes.
But we then have to, I'm sorry, I have a serious problem with that, not about bees, just in general. Now we have to start writing everything that we think might come up to abolish it. I mean, this is not like Footloose. I mean, we can allow dancing and other things just because it's not in the law. This is craziness to even think that. We think we have to write everything out of a law or a code just to make sure it doesn't happen. That's insane.
Again,
Probably a reasonable point there.
what we are bringing to you are things that, we're not making these up. We're not suggesting we need a regulation because somebody else has a regulation on bees. We get this question from our residents. Can we or can we not have a beehive in our backyard? And we have to give them the, well.
Yeah, I'm not faulting staff on this. It's just more of, it's a larger philosophical or legal.
Well, it's far better to be proactive and be explicit than have ambiguity. And that's what I think we're trying to address here, is to be explicit, yes or no.
Yeah.
So I think we should direct staff in that manner to be as explicit as possible. On the bee issue, if you look on the right-hand side, it's very true. I mean, they're endangered. I mean, they have a lot of positive benefits. And so I would encourage us to look at ways of permitting it, again, maybe not in, 2 hives, whatever it happens to be, maybe larger properties, whatever, but I would at least start looking down that road. I don't think they're livestock. That just seems crazy to me. But.
I'd agree with
Fair
the
enough.
professor, and I'll go on the record as saying I agree with him, even though he won't. But I do agree with the right-hand side of this.
Are you gonna say, let's dance now, Kevin Bacon?
We'll have to go, we gotta go to Urbandale.
How about the others?
So chickens, yeah.
Can I just?
On the
okay with
bees.
Having.
I don't feel strongly one way or the other, so if John wants it, then I'm good.
I'm fine with it.
All right,
On the other hand, chicken.
there we go.
It's the same situation. We're not just bringing this up because we want a regulation. It's because presently we've had to chase chickens out of our city based on our current code. We also know that there are other places in the city that have chickens, but we just don't have a neighbor complaining about it. So again, just having a discussion and really getting clarity on truly what is the acceptable practice within the city of Clive.
So Pete just pulled up Waukees ordinance. They do allow up to 6 hens only, no roosters. And it looks like it's probably pretty similar to this.
And no constraints that I see here on the first read of the full ordinance on size of the lot.
Anything
That's our current, right? It has to be,
No, you pretty much can't have it
Can't have it.
right.
under current regulation.
Any regulation on the coop?
Yes, extensive. You can't have the chicken tractor. They have sections here on keeping it clean. They have sections on disposal of the waste.
Which is vague also.
You
Probably till
now
someone
get a
complains.
certain size yard in order to have that, and we don't particularly have that. Is that correct?
Correct. You in essence need to be on a large residential estate, 5 acres, which isn't Clive
Right, we
for
don't
the
have.
most part.
That's how we had to tell a 12-year-old boy no on
Right.
this one.
Paxton Parker?
John
Yes.
was brutal on
I
that.
have a letter that I need to respond to.
Heartless.
I also found that Urbandale, Altoona, and Ankeny are no's for chickens. Windsor Heights, you can have 2, which I found in my research, you really shouldn't have 2. You should have at least 3 to 6 because they're herd animals that don't like to be alone. Then especially if one dies, you're not left with 1 chicken either. So that's why I have a 3 to 6. But again, it's a talking point only.
John, you have thoughts?
If we were a Waukee and Adel, you know, in a rural area, I could certainly see that, but that's not what Clive is. That is not what Clive is. Again, you know, if you had a large acreage and you could have some chickens, fine, but I don't think we want to go down this path.
All right.
But that's my opinion.
Other thoughts on?
We've opened that can of worms before. I would agree with John on that. Look, right now it works. Some people want to have a chicken. I get it. But, you know, urban fowl it's just, we're too condensed as a community for right now anyway.
I'd be okay with it. I think if you put some parameters around it, I mean, I think we do have some homes on the eastern portion of town that have very long, large lots that would be just fine. And we're gonna have some larger lots out west that I think it would be, I think it would be fine as long as we put some parameters around it so that, you know, if there are issues, we have a way to deal with it. So I don't think we should be turning away Johnny and being heartless with him.
You could have a rabbit cage, right? No?
That's my next one.
You're kidding.
We just don't have anything for it. It could be considered an accessory structure or nothing at all. Some cities have regulations for things like rabbit hutches, ducks.
Hutch, that was the word I was searching for, thank you.
Yep, rabbit hutch. Things like, pigeons, etc. I understand your point.
I mean, we could go through 100 more slides with species. No worm farms, no.
Again,
But
I
how do you
get
feel-
why you're doing
But how do you feel about chickens, Mike?
We're on to rabbits and ducks and birds and.
You never gave an opinion on chickens.
It seems to be kind of like a coming thing.
Hey, we've gotten a lot of requests.
Urban,
We've gotten
urban
a few
fowl
requests
is a
for it.
growing sense of,
Yeah,
of
it's-
people wanting to
Wanna
have
have
their own
fresh
eggs and such.
I don't know.
If someone had a hawk, would we allow the hawk in the backyard today? This is real, right? Predatory birds and people having hawks or falcons or owls.
I don't think we
Wild
have anything
animals that
for
aren't gonna be
Look,
domestic.
that.
we would
These are real. This is real.
Foul.
foul, whether or not you consider that a foul. And then if it is a foul, then there would be some limitations. So basically, you're back to the large residential estate.
Because homing pigeons are real, and we had a guy on 100th Street
We've had several.
that had a whole
Coop?
of homing pigeons.
Again, we're not
Oh,
just
the phone's gonna go down. So.
just bringing these up to have a discussion.
Then you'll
These
want
are
him
real
in here.
situations that we have to answer questions about. And they all wrap into this whole kind of urban agriculture concept.
I think that if you're gonna allow these things, that they need to be fairly restricted in a quality manner. I side a little bit with Ted on some of these things. I think that, you should be able to have pets. you
As
know.
long as it
it's-
doesn't impact your neighbors.
It's different if you have 30 chickens laying eggs and, you know, in the backyard and, you know, so, you know, let's figure out how to make that work. Just like we figured out a way to make, you know, plantings work in the right of way. Remember that discussion that we had 10 years ago? Same thing. And people didn't really do it. But we made it a respectable thing to do under our parameters in a way that we could engage people, engage our neighbors, and keep things relatively in hand. Now, donkeys are probably out, John.
Well, I was just thinking, as long as you restrict these and make these their service animals, then I think that's. Service animals.
So
Comfort
they had a
animal.
turkey on that airline was a service
Yeah,
one, and
yeah.
a miniature pony.
So again, just so we have some.
Kind of
bit
split.
Well, all over the board.
clarification here.
That's what I heard from the, glad I heard from the.
Seem to think I hear that try to allow this stuff with some suburban standards.
Reasonable standards.
So that you're not affecting your neighbors.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
the key
Yeah.
thing right there.
See, mostly had nods and a.
We're
John's
in a
heartless.
city, we don't live in a country.
We're gonna start
But we've
storing
got
the
some
goats in your
country-ish
backyard.
Houses, so.
Planning and zoning did mention the irony of, you know, Clive is distinct by nature. We have the goats, we have the sheep, yet
Yeah.
don't really regulate any of these other animals that
We
are
should
becoming
give some
popular.
consideration to these things. We're not gonna solve them immediately. It seems like there's discussions that could be had that could be productive and meaningful for our residents, and that we're just not saying no because we have 8-foot side yard setbacks or whatever. You know, it seems like a reasonable thing to look at.
Excellent. Thank you for wrapping that up for me. Well, I guess I will give you the opportunity. I don't know how anyone feels. This is the end of the groups that have been through P and Z. I know we're open to a discussion, but I have 2 more groups that are equally as lengthy as this. If
I think we
you,
have another work session is what I would suggest.
Yeah.
I figured if you would like to stop here, I have
let's make
plenty
it go
to
through
work on
P&Z.
if you prefer.
You're doing a tremendous job, by the way.
Thank you.
But let's, to Ted's point, let's get these others, let's have P and Z consider them, and let's have another work session.
Perfect.
I feel badly that Susan wasn't here to talk about chickens.
Well, we'll get her up to speed.
Her loss.
Oh, it'll come back.
Like herding cats.
Yeah, it'll come back.
It'll come back.
I have heard from a beekeeping group also that very much volunteered if council or other commissions wanted to hear from some experts, professionals, I am not, about what that entails. They volunteered to absolutely come talk to you
I
about
think
it.
we're good
So
on the bees.
you're good on the bees? Chickens? I can find a
You're on
chicken
pretty good.
expert.
We don't need it.
Hey,
Let's keep
in all
moving
seriousness, though,
forward.
former Representative Rob Taylor,
Yeah, he's a beekeeper.
he does that.
He does.
So
Mhm.
we can certainly get
He does
information.
it
He will
down,
talk to you a lot about bees.
down in Osceola.
There's no shortage of bee interest. It is a huge passion for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it is, no question.
And as a
Thank
city,
you
you are an
so
urban
much.
farmer. right?
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, very good discussion. Thank you all. Let's jump down to number 4. John, I'm glad you were thrilled with that discussion.
Donna, real quick, I wanted to give Doug an opportunity
Oh.
to give this council an update on kind of some of the other bigger picture development, District 1, just quick updates
Oh,
on
yes,
where we're at with some of
yes,
those.
Certainly.
So just kind of give you a quick whirlwind tour of the city of development activities. Starting east, we continue to make progress on the flood buyout program. Phase 1 is, we're down to 1 acquisition that just won't close.
Title issue? What's the problem?
It's
Long story.
One title issue after another. But we're going to get it done soon.
It's a FEMA one, so it's painful when it doesn't work.
So we've got one left to acquire. Had hoped that we were going to close today. That did not happen, so we'll continue working on it.
Feel your pain, Doug.
Yeah. In terms of phase 2 of the program, all 3 of the intended acquisitions have been consummated with purchase agreements. 2 have closed, 1 will close in a few months as the property owner is ready to vacate the premise. So we're in good shape there. In terms of demolition, all of the phase 1 properties have been demolished that we have. So there'll be restoration and so forth in the spring, but at this point, if you haven't been in the neighborhood,
It's incredible.
looks a lot different.
Gotta get that one on 75th done.
It's crazy.
Yes, yes. And the adjacent one is part of the phase 2 acquisition. So in any case, we continue to make progress there. We are waiting for word from FEMA on the additional funding that we made application for. Should know in another month or 2. And then also within that area, we are making progress with the District 1 selection process for consultant. We have narrowed the list, I think, of 12 down to 4, and we'll be interviewing those 4 firms next week. And thank you to a couple council members for participating in that. But we'll be looking forward to getting through that process and have a recommendation for you, hopefully at your first meeting in March, and then kick off that project in late March or 1st of April. We're excited to get to work on that. Any questions on any of those items on the east side at this point?
This is great progress, just to comment. I mean, it's from the bold step this council took 2 planning sessions ago now to where we are today, and now to the visioning piece that is, we took that step collectively that, we were thinking about just getting that done, and now we're thinking about, well, what's the vision? That we tend to have more conversations today about, about community gardens and access, and this whole urban ag concept that seems to be kind of coming back around is a very, very unique opportunity, I think, as we start to look at areas that are going to be, in some cases, greenfielded. So making progress, looking forward to this planning, envisioning very much with this group. Does that launch us into the next topic?
Did you have
pretty well?
I was just going to kind of quickly walk you through a couple of the other pieces if you don't have anything else on the east side. We are making progress with the University Corridor Study with our partners in West Des Moines. Consultant has been selected. We had a kickoff meeting this week. So that project is going to get moving in earnest here next month. And we'll start building a calendar of events, the public engagement activities, and we want to try to do some shared workshops with our council in P&Z and their council in P&Z so that we can all get to a point, hopefully, of having a shared vision and a kind of a shared sense of ownership of how to make this corridor work better moving forward. So again, that'll be an interesting process, but one that is starting to move along, and look forward to having your folks engaged in that as we do move that forward. Then as we get out west, most of our energy is really related to managing the development in the Shadow Creek area. So we have the existing Shadow Creek area south of the Little Walnut Creek that is going quite well. If you haven't been out in that area, it's pretty impressive to see the product that is being delivered out there. I think the developers have done what they said they were going to do, which is deliver the Clive way within those neighborhoods. They're obviously now doing quite well to the point where they're ready to jump across the creek, and you have public hearings upcoming regarding the zoning change and development agreements for a good chunk of ground north of the creek, another 250 single-family homes that will generally be kind of the same character and probably a higher character than what's to the south of the creek. So we look forward to that discussion. That's where, again, most of the energy and the activity from the new development is going to be in terms of getting the bridge built, the infrastructure built, getting the roadway alignments kind of figured out and coordinated with their neighboring communities, and the partnership with
Urbandale and Waukee in terms of working through those arterial roadway discussions and, trying to figure out ways to be smart of getting those facilities built in the right time with the right funding so that we don't have situations where we're going back against existing residential or future residential property owners. So again, most of the energy and activity for that new development is occurring out there. But we are seeing some additional activity in the Berkshire neighborhood space. Chase Landing kind of continues to finish out. So we have a little bit of other products being delivered. And then finally, we'll have some further discussion, but some exciting opportunities related to the parks that we're working on out in that western area. A couple, three neighborhood park concepts to have discussions about, and one of them being the opportunity on Alice's Road to look at trying to partner residential development with the park. We've got some ideas around that we're excited to share with you guys as well. So again, quite a bit of activity going on kind of across the city. So buckle up. It's going to be a fun one. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, council, comments?
Do you see any obstacles out there as we look at the development of those northwestern neighborhoods out there? Anything on the horizon that really puts a red flag out for you?
Really, it's the same red flag in my mind that has been there for the last 20 years, which is we continue to principally see 400,000 plus $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 homes. Where are the people coming that will continue to buy these things? But obviously, that's not something that we can control. It's something that is a risk, in my opinion, certainly if the economy changes and we have a lot of that product that can't move. That's certainly a risk, in my opinion. But for the last 20 years, that's been a risk, and we seem to do okay. I think otherwise, we have positioned ourselves very well to be able to support the development and absorb the impact of all of that new development within our infrastructure systems. So, the work that we all put into that advanced planning really does pay off, even though it's time consuming and expensive to do up front. Being able to understand what those impacts are going to be and be able to vision out how things are going to play out 5, 10, 15 years pays dividends. So we are in a great position to be able to support all of that new development that is just going to kind of march its way out over the next few years.
If I could just make a quick comment to dovetail off Doug's comments. Just as a side note, I have an opportunity to list about $1 million home in Granger. And so I literally just today was doing some research on the market for that price range of home. 5, 6 years ago, there were 18 sales in the metro, entire metro, of 800,000 plus homes. Kind of been in the 30s to 40s the last few years. Last year, there were 72 sales of 800 plus in the metro. And the days on market for those homes had been up in the 120s to 150s. Last year, it was like 77. So,
how many were there in Clive? Did you look?
I didn't look specifically at Clive. I certainly can pull that. But it was just really interesting data. Obviously, we have no way to predict what's going to happen this year or next year, but last year was by far the most that we've seen. And I went back 10 years, and nothing even close to last year. So,
Other questions or comments for Doug? Doug, thank you. Great update. Okay, we'll move to Economic Development Commission discussion. Matt?
Thank you, Your Honor. And with Susan not able to be here tonight for the discussion, and I would advise that we move this to a future agenda. Just to circle kind of around what this discussion was anticipating to be is I'd gotten some indication that there was maybe a desire to change direction a little bit in terms of where we were at with the economic development discussion from the strategic planning last August. With some of the activities that we're doing with University Corridor and also District 1 of kind of starting small with having development committees or engagement in those aspects being kind of the staff's current direction, and then there might have been a desire for a change in that direction. So I just wanted to circle back with the council on that. But I know this is a subject that Susan is very passionate about, so I wanted to make sure she was here for the discussion. And I mentioned to her on Tuesday when I touched base with her before she left on her trip that I would advise the council that we hold off on this discussion until she's present.
Okay. Joyce, anything else we need to know about?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Well, that concludes our discussion items, unless, Matt, there's anything else for the good of the order?
Nothing from me, Your Honor.
Council? Pete?
Quickly, building on what Matt said about economic development, this morning Clive was featured at the ICREA breakfast, and the ComDev team did a great job getting ready to show that group of influencers and stakeholders what this project for the University Corridor looks like, potentially as well. So it was start of some good engagement there and was well received. Water resources plan, initial RFQ responses are due tomorrow, and the goal is to have that, then a final proposal after we go through the process for the last meeting in March for this group to take a look at. And then finally, sort of in line with a lot of the water discussions that have been happening earlier this week, I went to a breakfast with the Nature Conservancy one more time just to emphasize with them how much we appreciate their ongoing collaboration with the oxbows and the wetlands and so forth. We want to make sure they hear loud and clear that we appreciate that and that we hope they'll continue to support those types of projects. A lot of moving pieces in the state right now when it comes to where people are choosing to put their focus. We want them to understand how much we appreciate the focus they put on Clive and other urban partners like us.
Questions for Pete, Council? Okay, everyone, if there's nothing else, we're going to adjourn at 8:01.